I say it is never too early for some mock draft action, and we have 7 rounds of it right here today. This video is part of a playlist on the channel dedicated to the 2025 NFL Draft for the Kansas City Chiefs. The Kansas City Chiefs are the only thing I talk about on this channel, so if you find yourself here by chance but not design, consider hitting the subscribe button to stick around for more Chiefs content. So let's get into it here. Round 1, pick 32, I have Ephesians Prysock, the cornerback out of Washington, who is 6'4", 193 pounds, and is projected to run a 4.45 40-yard dash. Now, there is an awful lot of projection going on here with Ephesians Prysock. The NFL draft community is all over the place on this prospect, and here's the thing that I am doing here is I am projecting him at the top end sort of his talent. If he does in fact decide to come out this year, he's going to be a first-round pick. There is something he knows that means that he is going to be drafted that high, and if he returns to college, it's because he was not projected to be a first-round pick. Sort of a boomer-bust thing here. But during his true sophomore season at Arizona, he posted 13 games with 61 tackles, a tackle for loss, an interception, and 7 pass deflections. And I don't think he's performing quite so strong this year at Washington, but we've seen 1,000 times before that a step backwards in production does not necessarily transcend into a step backwards as far as the draft is concerned. Now, in 2025, we will be seeing the last years on the contract of Nazeeh Johnson, Joshua Williams, and number 2 cornerback Jaylen Watson. This would give Ephesians a season to learn and not have to be counted on to be the number 2 guy, but if he is ready to transcend to that place, the spot will obviously be there in Steve Spagnuolo's defense. Spagnuolo loves to play a myriad of defensive backs, regardless of what it is we are seeing so far from Jaden Hicks. And during that season where Joshua Williams, Trent McDuffie, Jaylen Watson, and Nazeeh Johnson were all rookies, there were no shortage of snaps for those guys, except for Nazeeh Johnson. So Brett Veach flexing his DB development muscles early in the draft again, in my opinion, is something we just have to watch out for. And if that is the case, Ephesians Prysock offers a very high upside option at the cornerback position. Round 2, pick 64, Josh Conerly Jr., the offensive tackle out of Oregon, 6'4", 315 pounds, with a projected 5.0 40-yard dash. This is ultimately probably very late for Conerly to be taken. There are places that have him projected as the 3rd or 4th left tackle in this draft, in which case he would likely be a top 20-ish pick, a top 25 pick almost for sure. Now, in my opinion, it's a little bit of a catch-22 with Conerly because he has good feet and he has good hands, but he has weak upper body strength and he doesn't get a lot of push. So he's in the right places, but kind of without the right heft, which is something you wouldn't expect to see from a guy who's 6'4", which is on the lower end of the good size offensive tackle, but 315, which is a good weight for an offensive tackle. Now, what I really want to say about Conerly is that he seems to be if you were to take his high end, his ceiling, and compare it to the ceiling for Jawaan Taylor, they're kind of the same thing. Unfortunately, Josh Conerly also has penalty problems and has strength issues, as does Jawaan Taylor. It's a weird thing. Josh Conerly might just be Jawaan Taylor reincarnate. Now, half out of trolling and half out of necessity, I really wanted to take a wide receiver with this number 2 pick, but I couldn't find one on the board that would justify a pick there. The mock draft in which this took place, the run on wide receivers was early, was fast, and was heavy. So by the time the second round got here for the Kansas City Chiefs, there was kind of just nothing there. Now, in real life, I don't think that's going to necessarily happen to the Kansas City Chiefs because they are armed with 2 third-round picks, and Brett Veach likes to roll them bones, especially when you look at the fact that their first third-round pick is currently projected to be 68 overall, very early in that third round. So not only do they have the movement abilities to move up in the second, but they can move up in the first if they really wanted to. And just one last note on Conerly before we move on. As with any tackle who finds himself in any service ranked number 3 overall, there is a very high ceiling on Josh Conerly. If the Kansas City Chiefs could land him and he ends up at the top end of his ceiling, you're looking at an offensive line that includes Wanya Morris in his 3rd of 4 seasons, as well as Kingsley Suamataia in his 2nd year, Joe Thuney currently under contract, Creed Humphrey has been re-signed to an extension. Jawan Taylor might be here for the long haul for better and for worse, which could leave Trey Smith as the odd man out as his contract expires. And the Chiefs have a glut of offensive linemen without a whole lot of space on the roster or the salary cap. And finally, at round 3, pick 68, the Kansas City Chiefs take their wide receiver, Tre Harris, wide receiver out of Ole Miss, 6'3", 210 pounds, projected to run a 4.4 flat 40. This is a guy who has very high upside, in my opinion. I think that even physically, we're going to see some oddities from him. Just looking at him on film, it looks to me as if he has freakishly long arms, which is always a good thing for a wide receiver. And he may have a freakish broad jump as well as bench press numbers. Now, the thing with him is, it is going to depend a lot on the rest of the season, where he is drafted. Let me read you this. Against Louisiana State, he had 102 yards. Nothing particularly to write home about there. It was Louisiana State. South Carolina, he had 81 yards. Again, not all that impressive of a feat. But Kentucky has a pretty good defense, 176 yards. You go back to Georgia Southern, 225 yards, and back on the first game of the season, 94 yards versus Wake Forest, meaning that to this point in the year, pardon me, I missed a couple games, Middle Tennessee State, 130 yards. Furman, which is the Division II school, 179 yards. To this point in the season, he has 987 receiving yards. If he carries that through the bulk of SEC play, he's not going to be around in the third round of the draft. But in the mock draft simulator that I was using, he was available, and I believe this is the type of wide receiver they are hoping to target in the draft because they do have Xavier Worthy working on one side of the field, and it is likely at some point that Rashee Rice will serve that suspension that we know is on the way. Tre Harris has solid possession receiver written all over him, and he sort of reminds me of Luther Burden in a lot of ways. I think we are likely to see a whole lot of turnover at the wide receiver position for another season in a row, as the Chiefs know they have to switch something up at the position. Even if Sky Moore makes it through the season as a Kansas City Chief, I don't think he makes it to training camp next year. Justin Watson, in my opinion, has been a disappointment on the season. Who knows what is happening with Juju Smith-Schuster? Mecole Hardman always seems to find his way back, but at some point that seemingly has to stop. For Justin Ross and Nico Remigio, at some point you have to dance or turn the music off. And guys, that's pretty much all of the names. We have no idea what will become of Hollywood Brown at the conclusion of this season. I can't imagine he has a whole lot of suitors in free agency, but then again, why would the Kansas City Chiefs be one of them? Moving on to round 3, pick 96, that gives the Kansas City Chiefs 4 selections in the top 100 picks. Walter Nolan, defensive tackle out of Ole Miss, 6'3", 305 pounds, projected to run a 4.95 40-yard dash. Tershawn Wharton has been a pleasant surprise thus far this season. He is on a 1-year deal, and this is a surprising season from him. Will he revert to the norm henceforth? As for Nolan, I think he's a little bit more of a sure thing than the defensive tackles the Kansas City Chiefs have tended lately to target in the draft. He is not a great big body, but he does have a good first step. His game really will remind you, oddly, a little bit of Tershawn Wharton. He's got a better bull rush than Tershawn Wharton. I think he will ultimately be better against the run than Tershawn Wharton. But overall, this is a high-motor player that has the potential to make you regret double-teaming Chris Jones if you're only leaving a single body for Walter Nolan. And really, guys, that's all this defense needs to be super hyper elite, is a guy next to Chris Jones that makes them regret double-teaming Chris Jones. He doesn't have to be better than Chris Jones, not by any means. They just have to leave the offensive lineman in a quandary not knowing where to put bodies. That is a little bit what has happened to help Tershawn Wharton so far this season. Chris Jones is still getting all of that attention, and it seems to me that Tershawn Wharton has found a way to make his first step really count. And once that first step actually counts, the offensive line is in a predicament, or at least they would be if the Kansas City Chiefs had a defensive end who was doing a single anything, which is why we get into round 4, pick 129, Shemar Turner, the edge out of Texas A&M, 6'4", 300 pounds with a 4.8 40-yard dash projected. This is a very big guy who is going to be able to play anywhere along Steve Spagnuolo's defensive line. That type of versatility is going to come in hot on this offensive line. Defensive line. Leading up to the draft, all anyone's going to talk about is how he is the absolute prototypical 3-4 defensive end. But guys, I think he has the stuff to be able to excel in a traditional edge role. And in fact, I think he does have the heft and quickness to put some offensive tackles in a bind very fast. He would be an incredible defensive end against the run for the Kansas City Chiefs, but I think that he has the bull rush capabilities to constantly bring pressure against opposing quarterbacks from the defensive end position. Now, he's a little bit raw, and sometimes with those guys who are a little bit raw, what will end up happening is they'll say, okay, we'll just play the defensive tackle position for now. I think that would be a mistake with Shemar Turner. I think Shemar Turner absolutely has the tools that what you're going to want to do is just teach him the defense, not the specifics of what a defensive tackle or defensive end does, because he has the physicality and the tools to be able to translate these things that he's learning at the NFL level across the entirety of the defensive line, whether he's lining up at nose tackle, defensive tackle, edge, defensive end, whatever it is. And in my opinion, his hands are very active, but they are not very precise. So maybe an off-season of jiu-jitsu with, like, I don't know, a former Penn State defensive end or something would do him a lot of good. Staying at the edge position, round 5, pick 159, Jordan Burch, the edge out of Oregon, 6'6", 295 pounds, with a projected 4.78 40. These are absolutely freakish numbers. If this is the actual player that Jordan Burch ends up being, I do not believe he will be there this late in the draft, but things like that happen all the time in the draft. This is another guy who is going to play all along the defensive line, 6'6", 295. And if you take the time to watch him, what you'll notice very fast is that he looks like a tight end. I mean, the athleticism on Jordan Burch is absolutely ridiculous. I can't tell you why everyone I have seen or heard from about Jordan Burch has him as a 5th to 7th round player. It does not, at this point, make any sense to me. There's a little bit of an issue with his productivity, but productivity at the defensive end position at the college level is not really the most telling thing about a prospect. Ultimately, yes, you want to see them produce at the college level against inferior offensive tackles, but I think what you're doing with Jordan Burch is trusting your coaches to get the most out of that athlete. And again, there are seemingly 100 million different places where you can get draft information these days. Maybe I'm just looking at the wrong ones. Maybe I haven't paid particularly close attention lately. Maybe the stuff I was reading and watching and listening to was outdated. But Jordan Burch does not seem like a 5th-round player to me. The Kansas City Chiefs currently do not have a 6th-round pick. In the 7th, at pick 198, I have them taking Phil Maffa, the halfback out of Clemson, who goes 6'1", 230 pounds with a 4.55 40-yard dash. We have seen this season the effectiveness of a running back with some heft in this offense. The stuff Kareem Hunt brings to the line of scrimmage is just a little bit different. Now, sort of the sandwich du jour for the NFL draft community over the last decade or so at the running back position has been the term one-cut runner. You've heard it a million times. Phil Maffa is more of a zero-cut runner. In fact, there are times where he looks irritated at the suggestion of changing directions. Phil Maffa will not be going on 40-yard runs at the NFL level. Phil Maffa will not be tearing off 300-yard Jamal Charles performances in the NFL. I don't think that's what the Kansas City Chiefs need. Isaiah Pacheco will be entering the final year of his rookie contract. Kareem Hunt is a mystery box for next season, but his running style has been very profitable for the Kansas City Chiefs through 2 games. And the same goes to a lesser extent for Carson Steele. Carson Steele has been relatively effective for what you could expect for a UDFA getting the carries that he's gotten. Should the emphasis on a power running game continue in Kansas City, Phil Maffa would be a good choice in the 7th round. Now, I have 7 UDFA listed here, and I'm going to take these a little bit more quickly than the other selections. I do think that the Kansas City Chiefs are going to try to load up at defensive tackle in this draft/UDFA market because I think they're going to be at the throwing the noodles at the wall stage of trying to find defensive tackle depth. As far as that is concerned, Thor Griffith, the defensive tackle out of Louisville, 6'2", 320 pounds, projected to be a 4.95 40-yard dash. Point blank, period. This is an attempt to get a run stuffer. I do not know that he will have a 4.95 40-yard dash, but he has been timed at having a 1.65 10-yard split, which is good for a 320-pound individual, but also he has put up 45 reps, reportedly, with 225 pounds on the bench press. This is a guy that is going to be brought in order to try to shore things up on 3rd and short. Ty Hamilton, defensive tackle, 6'3", 295 pounds, out of Ohio State. Hamilton, in my opinion, is one of these players that does not particularly have any measurables, will not particularly have any outspoken tools to his game. He's just a guy who consistently gets on the field and produces. Now, maybe I'm missing something, and there's a reason that he is able to produce the way that he does, but I think he's just one of these guys that you can bring in the ranks of UDFA and kind of count on making your roster, your opening day roster, should he fall through the ranks into the undrafted. He's not a run stuffer, he's not a pass rusher, he's just a solid guy at the defensive tackle position. I don't think there's a whole lot of upside there. I don't think the ceiling is very high, but I think you're getting a guy that could consistently eat snaps and not embarrass a defense. Then bringing in another wide receiver named Elijah Badger, 6'1", 192 pounds, projected to run a 4.55 40-yard dash out of Florida. Badger is really strong at catching on the run. He is very strong at the transition between catch and run. He's a hands catcher. He seems to always have separation. This is a guy that, frankly, might be a bit of a hidden gem. One of those guys that's kind of good at everything, but not particularly good at anything, and at the NFL level, that translates to kind of quiet production. Now, I say that, and I might be simply ahead of the curve on this because this year he has already played Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi State, Texas A&M, a lot of, maybe not the heaviest hitters in the SEC, but a lot of SEC schools, and he has a 23.8 yard per reception average, 22 catches, 524 yards, 23.8 yard average, and 2 touchdowns. That'll get you noticed. And then we have DeCorian Clark, the wide receiver out of UTSA, UTSA, 6'3", 215 pounds, projected to run a 4.45 40-yard dash. It feels like I have been putting DeCorian Clark in mock drafts for 4.5 years. Now, stop me if this sounds familiar. DeCorian Clark is a supersized wide receiver prospect, 6'3", 215, with what looks like good speed, though I do not have an official 40-yard dash time. He proved himself to be a deep threat at the college level before his career was derailed by injuries. Guys, if Justin Ross finds his way off of the Kansas City Chiefs, the Kansas City Chiefs could find a spare. Clark might not have any football left in his bones, but if he does, it would absolutely be worth a training camp invite for a guy that looks like he could play X-receiver in the NFL at a very high level should he be able to stay on the field. Yes, the Kansas City Chiefs have, should he be able to stay on the field, problems as it is, but this roll of the dice would be absolutely worth it. Moving on, Malik Dixon-Williams, a safety, because there has to be a safety, out of UConn, 6'1", 200 pounds, with a projected 4.55 40-yard dash. In 2022, he had 87 tackles, 2 interceptions, and 6 pass deflections. Subsequent seasons have not been nearly so impressive. 2023, 43 tackles. 2024, 32 tackles. Each of these seasons having a single interception and a single pass deflection each. I do not care. Anytime a safety has 87 tackles, 2 interceptions, and 6 pass breakups, any point in his college career, you bring him in and do your due diligence. He is sort of average size, looks to be average speed, does not appear to have any particular measurables, any particular tools, but as a sophomore, I'll say it again, 87 tackles, 2 interceptions, and 6 pass deflections. Staying at UConn, a different position, Chase Lunt, offensive tackle, 6'8", 305 pounds, projected to run a 5.1 40-yard dash. In 2021, he started 11 games at right tackle. In 2022, he started 13 games at right tackle. 2023, he started 12 games at right tackle. And I believe, though I cannot find exactly online, he has started all 7 of the Huskies football games so far this season, giving him 43 starts, about halfway through what will be his senior season in college. You will likely notice the similarities in size between him and this season's UDFA standout from Marshall, Ethan Driscoll, who goes 6'8", 313 pounds. Though I think Lunt is a little bit lighter on his feet, would be a little bit more of a pass blocker than is Ethan Driscoll, who I think will be better in the running game, and I think might have a future at offensive guard in the NFL versus offensive tackle. And finally, linebacker Tyreme Powell, because there has to be a UDFA linebacker, and as far as UDFA linebackers go, he's listed at 6'5", 245 pounds, projected to run a 4.6 40-yard dash out of Rutgers. But the latest numbers I can find, the ESPN roster has him listed at 6'5", 252. Now here's the thing with him. He's not the heat-seeking missile that a lot of the Chiefs' UDFA linebackers have been. A lot of these guys that the Chiefs pick up as UDFA for the linebacker position, they're guys that produced at the college level. They are guys who the NFL is de-emphasizing the linebacker position. Well, we're going to pick them up here, and we're going to take a guy who can play. Tyreme Powell is a little bit different. He's a little bit messy on the field, and maybe what you want to do, depending on his arm length, would be to maybe see if you can pack 15 pounds on him and have yourself a defensive end. But anyway, that's it, guys. 7 rounds and 7 UDFA for the Kansas City Chiefs in the mock draft presentation. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other Kansas City Chiefs fans. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, consider hitting the subscribe button in order to stick around for more Kansas City Chiefs content in the future. And as always, I hope to have you back for the next one.